The courtroom was silent, the air thick with tension, as the judge's gavel struck the surface of the wooden desk. "Guilty." The judge's voice cut through the suffocating stillness. The words echoed in the room, freezing everyone in their place. Michael Drake stood motionless, disbelief seizing his body. His face paled as he processed the weight of the verdict. His mind raced, flashes of his life before this moment. The family he loved, the innocence he held, all now shattered. The air felt heavy, suffocating. As the gavel's echo faded, he turned to face the people who had once trusted him, now looking at him as though he was a criminal. The truth had been buried, twisted into something unrecognizable. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. Later that night, Clara Roberts sat at her cluttered desk in the dim light of her office, the files spread out before her. The weight of what she had uncovered began to settle in. Michael Drake's case wasn't a simple mistake or misunderstanding. Something much darker was at play, something hidden in the layers of bureaucracy and power. She knew this wasn't just about proving a man's innocence. It was about exposing a system that had been manipulated by those with too much control. Her mind raced, connecting pieces of the puzzle that didn't seem to fit. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became. This wasn't an isolated incident. There were forces beyond what she had imagined, ready to protect their secrets at any cost. "I have to get to the truth," Clara muttered to herself, determined, even though she knew it would put everything, and everyone, at risk. The next day, Clara met Michael at a small, quiet cafe near the courthouse. They sat across from each other, the space between them filled with unspoken tension. Michael had barely spoken since the trial, still reeling from the verdict. Clara leaned forward, her eyes softening as she spoke. "I know it's hard to believe, but the system isn't what you think. There are people pulling strings behind the scenes, manipulating the outcome of these cases." Michael's eyes met hers, his gaze flickering with skepticism and a deep-rooted frustration. "I don't know who to trust anymore," he said, his voice low, filled with doubt. Clara placed a hand on the table, her voice steady but urgent. "Trust me. We need to dig deeper. Whoever's behind this won't stop until we're buried under their lies. But we can expose them. Together." A silence lingered, and Michael's gaze softened, though the weight of his loss still clung to him. He finally nodded, his resolve hardening. "Then let's find them. Let's take them down." Then, Clara spent the next few days digging into the case, uncovering layers of corruption she had never imagined. She found irregularities in the police reports, missing evidence, and witnesses who had disappeared without a trace. The deeper she went, the more dangerous the investigation became. One night, while reviewing the evidence, Clara stumbled upon a name she hadn't expected: Detective James Carter. He had been involved in the initial investigation, but his connections to the case seemed off. She couldn't put her finger on it yet, but there was something about him that felt wrong. As she prepared to follow the trail, her phone buzzed. It was an anonymous message: "Stay away from Carter. He's not who he seems." The warning sent a chill down her spine, but it only made her more determined. Whoever was trying to cover this up wasn't going to scare her away. The truth was still out there, and she was getting closer. Clara arranged a meeting with Michael in a dimly lit alleyway, far from prying eyes. They needed to talk in private, away from anyone who might be watching. The air was thick with tension, and Michael could barely contain his nervousness. "I think we're being watched," Clara said, her voice low but firm. "Someone's trying to make sure we don't get too close to the truth." Michael's heart raced as he glanced around, his mind racing with the implications. "Then what do we do now?" he asked, his voice shaking. Clara reached into her bag and pulled out a small recorder. "We keep digging," she said, her voice steady. "We expose them before they can silence us." Michael nodded, though fear was written all over his face. "I just want to be free of this, Clara. I want to clear my name." Clara's expression softened for a moment. "We will, but we need to be careful. They'll do anything to protect themselves." Days had passed since Michael's trial, and Clara's investigation was leading her deeper into a web of deceit. Her instincts told her that something wasn't right with Detective James Carter. His involvement seemed too smooth, too coordinated. But every lead she followed only led to more dead ends. As she reviewed her notes, a familiar name resurfaced. Daniel Harper, a lawyer known for getting criminals off the hook. Too many of them. Clara's heart sank as she pieced together the connection. Harper had ties to powerful figures who could manipulate the justice system, and now it was clear. Carter had been working with him. Clara felt the weight of the investigation press down on her, but she couldn't stop now. She had to expose them. Her phone buzzed with a new text message. "Meet me at the docks. I have information on Carter." Clara's mind raced. She couldn't trust anyone, but she had no choice but to follow this new lead. The docks were silent, the sound of water lapping against the metal pillars echoing through the night. Clara arrived, the cool breeze rustling her coat. She had no idea who had sent the message, but desperation forced her to follow. As she stood in the shadows waiting, a figure appeared in the distance. It was a man, cloaked in a dark jacket, moving with purpose. He stopped just short of her, his face hidden beneath the brim of a hat. "You're Clara Roberts, right?" the man asked, his voice low. Clara nodded cautiously, keeping a few steps of distance. I've got information on Carter, but I can't be seen talking to you." He handed her a small folded piece of paper, then quickly turned and disappeared into the darkness. Clara unfolded the note, reading the cryptic message. "Carter's been on the take for years. Harper is the key." Clara's heart raced. She knew she was onto something bigger than she had imagined. Back in her office, Clara sat at her desk, the note from the docks now pinned in front of her. "Harper is the key," she muttered under her breath. She had heard whispers about Daniel Harper, but she never imagined he could be involved in something so deep. The more she thought about it, the clearer it became. Harper had ties to the city's elite, and he was untouchable. As Clara ran through her contacts, she realized that the lawyer's influence stretched far beyond the courtroom, into politics, business, and the police force. Michael's case wasn't an isolated one. It was part of a much larger network of corruption. Clara clenched her jaw, her mind made up. This fight was no longer about clearing Michael's name. It was about dismantling the entire system. But the deeper she went, the more dangerous it became. "I need more," she whispered. The next step was to confront Harper, but Clara knew she couldn't do it alone. Clara reached out to an old contact in the press, hoping to get a lead on Daniel Harper. She knew it was risky. If Harper had any inkling of her investigation, it would be over before it even began. The next day she met with her contact, Mark, in a rundown diner on the edge of the city. Mark, a reporter in his late 40s with graying hair and sharp eyes, leaned in as Clara slid into the booth. "Harper's been playing both sides of the game," Mark said, his voice low. "I've been tracking his donations to political campaigns, and let's just say, he's got his fingers in more pies than I thought." He passed Clara a folder with a few documents and photos. "This should give you what you need. Just be careful, Clara. People have disappeared for less." Clara's heart raced as she took the folder. It was the break she needed. But with it came a warning she couldn't ignore. Danger was closing in fast. Clara stood in front of Daniel Harper's office building, her mind racing. She knew that getting to him would be no easy task. Harper was a master manipulator. She had watched him from afar during his courtroom appearances, always poised, always in control. But now, Clara was determined to break that control. As she entered the building, the atmosphere felt cold and sterile. The polished floors gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and everything about the place screamed power and influence. Clara took the elevator up to the top floor. The doors opened, and she was greeted by a receptionist who smiled professionally, but with an air of cold indifference. Clara introduced herself, but the receptionist's eyes flickered with an emotion she couldn't quite place. Clara's instincts told her that this was a place of secrets, a place where everything was calculated. But she wouldn't be deterred. She was here for answers, and Harper wouldn't hide behind his power much longer. Clara sat at her desk, the evidence now piling up in front of her. The case against Daniel Harper was stronger than ever, but the more she uncovered, the more danger she felt looming over her. Every file, every document seemed to point toward a conspiracy that went beyond just Harper. There were other players in the game, powerful people with the means to control everything. Her phone rang, cutting through the silence of her office. It was Michael. "Clara, you need to be careful. Someone's watching you." His voice trembled with concern. Clara's eyes flickered to the window. The shadows outside seemed to grow darker. "I'm fine, Michael, but this is bigger than we thought. We need to move fast." She hung up, her heart pounding. The walls were closing in. Clara's next step took her to the heart of the city, where she met with Mark, the reporter who had helped her before. This time, they were meeting in a small bar, away from prying eyes. Clara slid into the booth, glancing over her shoulder to make sure no one was following. Mark's face was grim as he handed her a folder. "This is bigger than I thought," he said, his voice low. "Harper's not just a lawyer. He's tied to some of the most powerful people in the city." Clara flipped through the documents, each one confirming what she had suspected. The deeper she went, the darker it became. She had to move fast before the people behind this made their next move. Clara's phone buzzed as she was leaving the bar. The text was from an unknown number. "Meet me at the old warehouse. I know what you're looking for." The message sent a chill down her spine. She knew the warehouse well. It was abandoned, a place where things disappeared without a trace. Clara's instinct screamed at her to be careful, but she knew she had no choice. As she approached the warehouse, the door creaked open. She stepped inside, her footsteps echoing in the vast empty space. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man she didn't recognize, but his eyes were cold and calculating. "I have the proof you need," he said, his voice low. Clara's pulse quickened. But before she could speak, he vanished into the darkness, leaving her standing there, with nothing but a piece of paper in her hand. Clara returned to her office, the paper in her hand now trembling from the weight of what it revealed. The figure at the warehouse had given her something important, a list of names, each one connected to Harper. But there was something off about it. The names weren't just connected to criminals or corrupt politicians. Some of them were from the inside, people Clara trusted, people she never thought would be involved. She sat down, staring at the list, her mind racing. Betrayal was something she had never expected from those closest to her. But the pieces were falling into place, and every name on the list was another key to unraveling the corruption. Clara's phone buzzed again, interrupting her thoughts. "Clara, they're coming for you," Michael's voice warned, panic in his tone. "You need to get out now." Clara knew she didn't have much time. The people behind this were getting desperate, and they were willing to do anything to protect their secrets. She grabbed her coat and made for the door, but as she reached the hallway she heard a knock. Her heart raced as she instinctively reached for her gun. But when she opened the door, it was Detective James Carter, standing there with a calm, unreadable expression. "Clara, we need to talk," he said, his voice soft but firm. Clara felt a wave of suspicion wash over her. "About what?" she asked, keeping her distance. Carter's eyes narrowed. "You're in over your head. Let me help you before it's too late." But Clara wasn't sure if she could trust him. Every instinct told her he was involved, and that the truth was more dangerous than she had imagined. Clara stood still, her breath shallow as Detective Carter's words echoed in her mind. "You're in over your head," he had said, but the doubt gnawed at her. His expression was unreadable, his stance confident, a man who knew too much. "Let me help you," he added, his voice cold but compelling. She had no reason to trust him, but part of her wanted to believe the offer. The darkness she was walking through was suffocating. "You can't handle this alone," he continued. Clara hesitated, but with the pieces falling into place, her mind raced. She had to know where his loyalties truly lay. "If you're really on my side, you'll prove it," she said, her voice steady. Carter's eyes flashed, but he didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked away. Clara watched him leave, uncertain if he was a friend or a foe. Clara's mind raced as she paced the small apartment. Carter's visit had left her with more questions than answers. She didn't trust him, but there was something about his behavior that made her pause. He had given her the opportunity to investigate further, but why? Was he trying to use her to get ahead? Or was he genuinely offering help? Clara couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always one step ahead of her. Walls were closing in, and every new ledge she uncovered felt like another trap. She needed to be more cautious than ever. As she leaned against the window, her phone buzzed again. Michael had sent a message. "They're watching you." A cold chill ran through Clara. The game had changed, and now she was a target. The next morning, Clara met with Mark at a secluded cafe. He looked around nervously before sliding a small envelope across the table. "This is it," he whispered. Inside were pictures of Daniel Harper, and beneath them, a series of documents detailing his connections to corrupt officials and police officers. The evidence was irrefutable. Harper was not just a lawyer. He was the architect of a much larger conspiracy. Clara's heart pounded as she scanned the files. This wasn't just about the case anymore. It was about exposing a network of corruption that went all the way to the top. "This changes everything," she muttered, her mind racing. She couldn't help but feel the weight of the truth settle on her shoulders. But even as she grasped the magnitude of the situation, Clara knew that Harper wouldn't let this go without a fight. The real battle was just beginning. Clara couldn't ignore the weight of the discovery. She knew she needed to take the information to the authorities, but doing so would put her in even greater danger. Harper had far-reaching influence, and exposing him could cause a chain reaction that she might not be able to stop. But as she sat in her office, staring at the evidence in front of her, her phone rang again. It was Michael. "Clara, you're running out of time. You don't understand. Harper's not just a lawyer, he's connected to something bigger. You have to stop him before it's too late." His voice was urgent, fear creeping in. Clara's pulse quickened. This wasn't just about clearing Michael's name anymore. This was about saving lives. The decision was no longer hers alone. She had to act, and act fast. Clara stepped into the courthouse, the weight of the documents and the truth heavy in her hands. She knew the risks of exposing everything, but she also knew that not doing so would mean more lives lost to the corruption that had taken root in the system. As she walked down the hall toward the courtroom, she saw a familiar face, Detective Carter. He was standing by the door, his eyes locking onto hers. "You shouldn't be here," he warned, his tone low. Clara held his gaze, her expression unwavering. "I'm not afraid of you, Carter, and I'm not going to let this go." She pushed past him, the door creaking open as she entered the courtroom. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara knew she was on the precipice of a battle she couldn't walk away from. The truth was finally going to be laid bare. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Clara stood in the back, watching as the defense and prosecution made their final arguments. Michael's future hung in the balance. She had spent months chasing down the truth, risking her life and reputation. Now, it all came down to this moment. The jury was silent, their faces unreadable. The weight of the case pressed on everyone in the room. Clara's mind raced as the defense painted Michael as guilty, twisting facts to fit their narrative. She knew what was at stake, but could she truly prove his innocence? She clenched her fists, determined not to let the lies win. The judge called for a recess, and the room slowly began to empty. Clara remained seated, her mind replaying every detail of the trial. The defense had made their case, but Clara knew there was more they weren't showing. She had one final piece of evidence that could turn the tide. But delivering it meant exposing secrets that powerful people wanted buried forever. As she sat there deep in thought, Michael approached her, his face pale but determined. "Clara, if this doesn't work, I'm not sure what will happen to me," he said softly. Clara met his gaze. "Don't worry, Michael. We're not done yet." Clara and Michael stood in the hallway outside the courtroom, their breath visible in the cool air. She could see the doubt in his eyes, the fear of losing everything. "If I lose this case, I'll never see the outside again," Michael murmured, his voice tight with emotion. Clara placed a firm hand on his shoulder, her eyes steady. "You won't. We're not giving up." But as she looked down the hallway, her stomach tightened. The final piece of the puzzle was in her hands, but giving it to the jury could have consequences neither of them could predict. "It's time," she said quietly. Michael nodded, his expression steeling for the battle ahead. Back in the courtroom, Clara took a deep breath as she approached the stand. The defense had rested its case, and now it was her turn to present the final piece of evidence, a recording that implicated key figures in the conspiracy. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her. She turned to the jury, holding up a small device. "This is the truth," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "What you hear next will prove beyond doubt that Michael is innocent." The room fell into a hushed silence as Clara played the recording, the damning evidence echoing through the courtroom. The tension was palpable, every eye locked on the speakers. The silence in the courtroom stretched for what felt like an eternity. The jury had left to deliberate, but Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. As she stood outside the courthouse waiting for the verdict, a man stepped out of the shadows. It was Carter. "You did well today," he said, his tone eerily calm. "But this isn't over. You've only scratched the surface." Clara's heart sank. She had uncovered the truth, but Carter's words made her realize that the fight was far from finished. "What do you want from me, Carter?" she asked, her voice steady but with a hint of challenge. He smiled, a cold, calculating grin. "I want you to be ready for what comes next." The courtroom was eerily quiet as the jury returned after hours of deliberation. Clara stood in the back, her breath held, her heart pounding in her chest. Michael, now seated in the defendant's chair, stared forward, his face pale, awaiting the verdict. The weight of everything they had fought for rested on this moment. The judge's voice broke the silence. "Woo, the jury, find the defendant." The words seemed to hang in the air. Clara's hands clenched into fists. No matter what happened, she knew the battle wasn't over. This was only the beginning. If the verdict went wrong, she would fight even harder. Justice would have to prevail, no matter the cost. The words, "guilty," hung in the air like a death sentence. Michael's body stiffened, his face paling as the jury's verdict was read. Clara felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. The weight of everything they had uncovered, all the sacrifice, had led to this moment, and it was not the outcome they had hoped for. But there was no time to dwell on defeat. Clara's eyes narrowed. She could already feel the invisible forces conspiring against them. This was not the end. She turned to Michael, who looked defeated, but her voice was firm. "We will appeal. This isn't over." The courtroom emptied, but Clara remained, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the feeling of injustice. Michael was guilty of nothing but being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and yet the system had failed him. As she gathered her things, she overheard a conversation between two officers in the hallway. "This case wasn't about Michael," one of them said. "It's about sending a message." Clara's heart sank. The truth was clearer than ever. Someone wanted to make an example of Michael, and they would stop at nothing to ensure that justice wasn't served. Clara's resolve hardened. She couldn't walk away now, not after everything they'd uncovered. Later that evening, Clara met with Michael outside the courthouse. The streets were quieter now, the city lights casting a faint glow on the pavement. Michael stood with his arms crossed, still reeling from the verdict. "I don't know how much more I can take, Clara," he said, his voice hoarse. Clara placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone." She paused, looking around the empty street. "I'm not giving up, Michael. We'll find a way to make this right." Michael looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. "Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you." Clara nodded, her resolve unwavering. "We fight. That's all we can do." As Clara and Michael walked down the street, the weight of their situation pressed heavily on them. Their fight for justice wasn't over, but Clara knew the path ahead would be dangerous. Every step forward seemed to lead to more obstacles, and every victory felt like a fleeting moment. The people behind this, the ones pulling the strings, were powerful, and they weren't going to back down. But Clara wasn't going to let them win. "We'll keep fighting, Michael," she said, her voice low and steady. "We'll find a way to take them down." Michael's nod was small, but it was enough to convey his trust in her. They had come this far. Now, they would go even further, no matter the cost. The days after the trial felt like an endless blur. Clara sat in her office, staring out of the window as the city hummed around her. The weight of the journey so far pressed down on her shoulders, but it was the final scene that mattered. She had fought for truth, for justice, and for Michael's freedom, but the road ahead was uncertain. The victory was still fragile. The case against Harper and his allies hadn't been fully dismantled. There were still powerful forces working in the shadows. Clara had been warned before, but now, more than ever, she realized just how deep the conspiracy ran. The truth was a weapon, and weapons always came with consequences. "The fight's not over," she whispered to herself. Despite all they had uncovered, the real battle was yet to come. The truth had been unleashed, but who would survive the aftermath? It was late, the streets outside deserted and shrouded in darkness, when Clara received a call. It was from Michael. "Clara, you need to see this," he said, urgency lacing his voice. She could tell something had shifted in him. This time the words he spoke were filled with something else, something darker. "Harper's not done. He's making a move. I think it's bigger than we imagined." Clara's heart raced. The victory in court had felt like a win, but it had only uncovered part of the web. The shadows she had once feared were now closing in, and this time Michael wasn't just a victim. He was a key player in a dangerous game. "I'm on my way," Clara replied, the determination in her voice clear. No matter what this new revelation meant, she would fight. She had to. For Michael. For the truth. Clara arrived at the abandoned warehouse, the air thick with the scent of rust and dust. The darkened streets led her to a shadowy corner where Michael was waiting. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he passed her a folder. "Harper's men have been moving something, shipments, files, I don't know what, but it's connected to all of this," Michael explained, his voice shaky. "This isn't just a legal battle anymore, Clara. We've stumbled into something much bigger." Clara's eyes scanned the documents as Michael spoke, her fingers running over the evidence. The pieces were beginning to form a clearer picture, but the danger was becoming more real. "This ends now," she said quietly, determination in her voice. There would be no turning back. Not this time. The more Clara and Michael uncovered, the more dangerous their situation became. Harper's network stretched further than they had imagined, with connections deep within law enforcement, government, and even local businesses. They were up against a system that had been built to protect its own, no matter the cost. As they pieced together the final threads of evidence, Clara realized that exposing Harper wouldn't just shake the system. It would topple. "If we go public with this," Michael said, his voice grim, "there's no telling what will happen next." Clara met his gaze, her jaw set. "We do what we must," she replied, the weight of her decision sinking in. There was no going back now. The fight for justice had to be taken to the highest level, and that meant risking everything. With the evidence in hand, Clara and Michael made their way to the press office, determined to expose everything. The building loomed ahead, its glass walls reflecting the cold gray sky. Inside, the journalists were already gathering, waiting for the breaking news of the century. Clara's hands shook as she handed the folder to the editor-in-chief. "This is it," she said quietly. The editor's eyes widened as he scanned the documents. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked, his voice low. Clara nodded. "The world needs to know the truth." As the editor prepared to broadcast the story, Clara and Michael stood side by side, knowing that this was the moment that would change everything. No matter the cost.